This is episode 99 with Mac Prichard.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Bryan Teare.
You can go anywhere you want. You just need to decide where you want to go. What is up, everyone? This is your host, as always, Bryan Teare, and welcome back to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast. Episode 99 today, and those were the wise words of this week's incredible guest, Mac Prichard. Now, before we get into the interview, just got a little bit of a celebration, I think, that needs to be done here. Even though this is episode 99, it is, in fact, the 100th episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast since we started on episode 0 and not episode 1. So I just want to take a second to acknowledge you guys, as I acknowledge every guest, for being along for this ride. I still cannot believe we've reached 100 episodes, but I'm going to save most of that celebration for next week. The other celebratory point is that when I opened up my stats this morning, we have 50,000 downloads of the podcast, which I don't take lightly, and I truly appreciate every one of you who've listened, subscribed, shared, downloaded, rated, reviewed, and all that good stuff. And I just really am grateful that you're on this journey with me. Anyway, before we get misty-eyed here, let's get on to this week's episode. And Mac Prichard is the founder and publisher of Mac's List, which is an online community for people looking for rewarding, creative, and meaningful work. A leading career expert, Mac helps people who are looking for a job during all of life's transitions, whether that's millennials getting their first job, midlife professionals switching sectors, parents getting back to work after raising a family, or baby boomers wanting to change careers. Mac is also the proud owner of 2 B Corps, which use the power of markets to solve social and environmental problems. He's the author of Land Your Dream Job Anywhere and hosts a weekly podcast called Find Your Dream Job. If you're looking to change careers and finally find that dream job you've been searching for, this interview is for you. We also cover the do's and don'ts of job applications so you don't just find the dream job, but land it too. Now, in this episode, you're going to learn the most important thing to prepare before a job interview, 3 ways to find your dream job, even if it's not posted, how to become an overnight success in 17 years, hint, start small, how to get the most out of networking events, the biggest thing to avoid when looking for a dream job, and how to change careers, whether you know what's next or not. This interview was absolutely incredible, and I urge you to take a listen. You can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at bryanteare.com/099, baby, 99. But for now, guys, let's go hang out with Mac. Welcome back, everyone, and a big welcome to today's guest. I'm honored to be speaking to Mac Prichard. Mac, welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be on the show, Bryan.
Yeah, I always love having, a lot of my guests have been in their 20s themselves or just out of that, but I always love having slightly older guests on. I find it's a whole new dynamic with kind of a mentor kind of perspective. So I'm excited to be speaking to you today. But before we get into all the good stuff, why don't you tell people listening a bit about who it is that you are and your quarter life story?
Well, I'm actually in my 50s. I run 2 small businesses. One is a public relations company that helps nonprofits, foundations, and purpose-driven brands tell their stories. And the other is an online community called Mac's List. It helps people find rewarding creative work. It includes a job board, a podcast, books, and online courses. The constant that runs through my career, Bryan, I have more than 30 years experience as a communicator working in politics, government, and nonprofits, is trying to make a difference about issues I care about and in the community where I live and work. And both of my companies, which are certified benefit corporations, part of a global movement for business as a force for social good, are help me do that, and my teams as well.
Yeah, I love the concept of business for good, and I want to come back to that a little later on. But just before we get into some of the good stuff, what were some of the challenges that you faced when you were in your 20s?
Well, I I don't know that I could have said it this clearly when I graduated from college, but in hindsight, there were three things I knew I wanted to do. One was to get paid to write. Another was to work on election campaigns. And the third was to do human rights advocacy in Latin America. And by the time I was 25, I had done all of those things. I had three great jobs right in a row. One was on a U.S. Senate race here in the United States, a terrific opportunity. It was in the Midwest, in the state where I grew up. Then I went to Washington, D.C., and in my early 20s, I worked for a human rights organization that pitched international and national media about human rights stories in Latin America. That's where I learned my basic public affairs skills, how to write a news release, a story, work with reporters. And my third job was taking members of the U.S. Congress and other policymakers to Central America. And this was, again, in the 1980s. And I did it for a human rights group based in Boston. So I say all this because when I was ready for my next job, it would come easy. And it didn't because I had not mastered job hunting as a skill, Brian. And I left that third job when the program came to an end. And I actually was out of work for about 8 months in spite of all this great experience. And that time of unemployment was a valuable lesson to me that has informed my career since then. And it was a big turning point in my mid-20s.
Mm-hmm. What was the big lesson in there, and how did you sort of take steps out of that period of unemployment?
There were two big lessons. One was that you need to be clear about what you want to do. And I can remember applying for jobs during that period of unemployment, and I had experience in a number of different areas. I was a good fundraiser. I was a good political organizer. I knew how to write. I knew how to work with policymakers. And I would get job interviews in all of those areas after applying for positions, but I never got an offer, Brian. And I think it was because the interviewers could tell I was uncertain about what I wanted to do next. Mm-hmm. So I learned the hard way through a lot of missed opportunities the importance of knowing what you want to do next. Now, you don't have to pick a goal for the rest of your life, but you do need to be clear about what you want to do for the next year, 3 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. Second lesson I learned was the importance of mastering job hunting as a skill. I thought the way you looked for work was you applied for formally posted positions. Now, bear with me, this was way back in the 1980s, and in those days, you looked at newspaper advertisements. Today, of course, people look at job boards. And I run a job board now. I'm very proud of the value it offers, but I think you may know this, and many of your listeners may as well, aren't posted on job boards. They're filled by word of mouth. And there's a reason for that. We can talk more about it. But in hindsight, that's actually how I got those first 3 great jobs I had. They were all through my personal relationships and connections and word of mouth. And that period of unemployment taught me the value of understanding how hiring works and learning and approaching it as a skill. And I've had a lot more success professionally since I mastered that lesson.
Yeah, I actually wrote an annual review at the end of last year, 2017. And I think the biggest lesson that I learned was that your relationships and your skills will get you wherever you want to go. And in this case, the job hunting skills. And certainly the last few jobs that I've had have been through my network and relationships that I've built. And you made a really key distinction. You said you need to know what you want to do next. And the key there is that word next, because so many people in the 20-year age group and even sometimes older are so stressed out these days about like, I don't know what I want to do, but you don't need to know what you want to do forever. You just need to know what you want to do next. And so often that leads to the next opportunity. But if people are listening to this and wondering, well, you know, it's all good and well needing to know what I want to do, but how do they go about figuring that out?
It's a great question because there are a number of ways you can do it. I think it starts with self-assessment. And the people I see who are successful, and I talk to a lot of job seekers because of our work at Max List, spend some time analyzing their strengths and knowing what they're good at. And there are plenty of tools out there that I'm sure are familiar to your listeners, like Myers-Briggs or Strength Finders. You can also work with career coaches, or if you're a university graduate, often you can return to your university career services office and they will help you do some basic assessment. But then once you have a sense of what your strengths are, you do need to set some goals. And to your point, you don't have to map out, pick a job that you're going to fill for the next 10, 15, 30 years. Figure out what you want to do next. If you're uncertain about what to do, my experience has been in talking with job seekers, it's that most of us carry around a short list of goals that interest us. The people I see who are successful at figuring out what to do next, they take that short list of goals, those 2 or 3 ideas, and they explore them. And one of the best ways to do that is through what are called informational interviews. These are structured conversations with people in the field that interest you that give you a chance through what is basically a business meeting, an opportunity to find out about those jobs, what hiring managers look for when they fill those positions, what they pay, what skills matters, what local employers might be hiring. And those, when you have a number of those conversations, typically you figure out pretty quickly which of your 2 or 3 goals interest you the most. And that allows you to focus in on pursuing that opportunity. And the conversations that you've had through these informational interviews make you a much better candidate when you are actually applying for and interviewing for jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my mentors, I interviewed him way back, like one of the first ever episodes I did, episode 5, I think it was. His name is Simon Hurry, and he's a specialist in the StrengthsFinder tool. But he said to me as well, like, and this comes back to you mentioning knowing what you want. He said sometimes it's valuable to take a job if it's going to, it might not be exactly the job that you want to do long term, but it will develop a skill that you're looking to develop or grow relationships that you're looking to grow. And then you can sort of leverage those going forward. I just want to come back for a second to Mac's list because, it's obviously a really cool, a really valuable tool now, but back when you started, it was really simple. Tell us what it looked like, sort of version 1.0.
Well, it's a 17-year overnight success, Brian. It began way back in 2001. I'd left a position in state government here in the Pacific Northwest in the United States. I wanted to stay in touch with my colleagues in government. Nobody complains about receiving a job posting, so we all get these. They cross our desks occasionally. I took the trouble to set up a simple list of a few dozen names of people I wanted to stay in touch with. So it was a form of networking for me, and it went on for years. At the end of 8 years, the list was about 1,000 names. It took so much time that it had become a part-time job. And by that point, I'd actually started my public relations company. Didn't have time to invest in the list, so I turned it into a simple newsletter, and that reduced the amount of time involved, but it became even more popular. And what I started charging employers for listings, and today we get about 80,000 people a month who come, and Mac's List employs a staff of 5. And the reason employers use us is because they get we've created an online community. We've grown organically by word of mouth, and it is a network. And to your point earlier, most jobs are filled by networks and networking rather. And the reason people do that, hiring managers do, is because they're trying to manage risk, and they do that by turning to people they know, like, and trust, or who are recommended to them by people they trust.
Yeah,
and Mac's List mimics that.
Yeah, I love that. And the reason I asked about the sort of backstory and the growth of it is because I think there's so much value in people stress so much these days about like having these big visions of their company that they want to create or their business that they want to start. But then they get caught up on what it's going to look like 5 years down the road, where it can be so almost stupidly small in the beginning. And you you probably had no idea it would grow to what it is today when you started. It was a way to keep in touch with people that you cared about. So yeah, for people listening, like, don't be intimidated by something seeming too small to start off with. You never know where it's going to grow. So I do want to shift the conversation to speaking about dream jobs. You have a podcast about finding your dream job. And we've mentioned informational interviews and networking, but what are some of the key ways for people to kind of beat out the competition and find their dream job?
Well, again, I think it comes back to knowing what it is you want to do, what you want to do next. And I'm so glad you brought up the point about how people often do get stressed out thinking they have to have a perfect next job. And I think it's important to recognize we're all going to have 10 or 15 employers in our career, and each job offers an experience to master new skills. I think once you're clear about what it is you want to do next, going out and doing the kind of networking we talked about is vital. In addition to informational interviews, another good way to do that is by identifying the industry events in the field where you want to work. There's a professional association for every occupation, and the leaders and the hiring managers in those fields go to those events, and you want to become part of that community. And in addition to informational interviews and attending industry events, a third great strategy is volunteering, whether you do that about something you care about personally, or you do it in your field, perhaps by serving on a committee for a professional group in your occupation. When you're out there volunteering, you're making relationships, making connections, and again, people hire people they know or who are introduced to them by people they trust, and relationships are so vital in job hunting.
I love that. So 3 really good ways there. I want to come back to networking. It's something that we all hear spoken about, but what are some ways that we can get the most out of networking events?
First, I think a lot of people, when they hear networking events, they think about, at least in the United States, some function room in an airport hotel filled with people who are passing out business cards like candy. That's not effective networking. Networking is about, again, building relationships. And when you go to an event, you should have a goal in mind, and it's not to collect 15 or 20 or 30 business cards. You want to have 2, perhaps 3 conversations with people with the recognition that these are people in your field. You are probably going to cross paths with them many times in the years ahead. And so go in with the idea that success looks like just having a couple of meaningful conversations with people at that event. If you want to, there are a lot of different ways to do that. If you're an introvert, uncomfortable approaching people you might not know, you can also think about volunteering at the event itself, perhaps manning the registration desk, volunteering to take photographs, offering to help with the mailings or the plannings. All of those things will let you build relationships and connections, just as having a conversation with people you don't know at an event will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. We've spoken about some great strategies for finding a dream job. What is something that you wish people would stop doing when looking for a job?
Spending 100% of their time in front of a computer, Brian, and think about the ratios here. There are estimates that as many as 80% of all jobs are never posted. Yet our most valuable asset is our time. And so many job seekers, often because they just don't know any better, they spend 60, 70, 80, 100% of their time in front of the computer applying for jobs. And again, I run a job board. There are great opportunities on job boards everywhere. But think about how you spend your day. If you're spending more than 30 or 40% of your time on job boards, you're probably not using your time well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, gotcha. So instead of just spending all day on job posting sites, get out there, leverage the relationships that you do have, and increase the networking and that kind of thing. And in that way, you're not just putting yourself out there for jobs that are available, but also jobs that aren't listed anywhere. Is that about it?
Yeah, that's correct. Because the candidates who are most successful are the ones who are clear about their goals, who have paid attention to their networks, their professional relationships, and grown them in a strategic, thoughtful way, and who, when they walk into an interview room, clearly know what they want and can explain the value they offer the employer, and they understand the employer's problems. And it takes research to do that. Also, the most successful people, I just want to add, Brian, when they think about networking, it's not just about asking people for help. It's also about being of service to others. And you've got to give as well as take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you how we can, and this comes back to what you mentioned right at the beginning about business for good. How can someone balance wanting to make a lot of money with wanting to do good in the world? Does it have to be a compromise, or is there a way to have both? What are your views on that?
Well, I think that you can do both, and the socially conscious companies are profitable, and those profits allow them to invest not only in their employees but also in their community. And those investments can take the form of supporting volunteer service by employees, making gifts to charitable organizations or public agencies in a community. And so I think there's no contradiction here. It's how you invest a company's resources and the time of its staff.
Gotcha. Now, something that I really want to ask is, are resumes still valid in job searches today? I know, like you mentioned, how a lot of jobs aren't even listed, and it's about relationships. But if we are going to use some traditional methods and job boards and that kind of thing, do we still need to put together a resume?
We do, for a number of reasons. One, employers still ask for them. It's a common request when you apply for a job. They do function as a kind of extended calling card. They're sort of like a one-page business card. And particularly when you're doing informational interviews, a resume is a good introduction to your background and shows what you've done for others. So you do want to pay attention to them. 20 years ago, all you needed was a resume. Today, you've got to pay attention to not only your resume, but your online presence, because employers Google us all when we apply for jobs, and they pay attention to what pops up, not only on the first page, but some employers dig down 2, 3, even 10 pages through an organic search. LinkedIn, your LinkedIn account is especially important. Employers will spend more time there probably than anywhere else online. And so it's different from your resume. It requires its own approach, but you want to pay attention to it as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned the online presence piece, because I often see people talking about getting a resume together, and then you just look at their social media accounts and you think, like, who would ever hire someone that's putting pictures with getting drunk and that kind of thing. And I've suggested before in one of these earlier episodes that a great way to kind of override some of the Google content that you find when you Google your name. Well, first of all, Googling your name is a really great exercise, but a great way to override that is to create content online and start writing, like create a blog or a Medium account if you want, but putting content out there so that eventually the stuff you don't want to be seen drops further and further down. And it also shows people what you're interested in and that kind of thing. A little tip that I want to throw in here is, and I've used this before, which didn't land me a job, but it definitely built relationships, was I identified people who I would love to work with. And I actually created, in fact, I think I did this for a job posting too, even though they didn't ask for it. I created a one-page website with a video that I shot explaining who I am and why I felt I was a good candidate and what my skills were and that kind of thing. And rather than sending a resume, it was just a one-page website basically with what you would find on a resume and then a video so people can get some sort of sense of who you are and what you're all about. So that's a way to kind of think outside the box and maybe stand out a little bit. We've spoken about...
It's a great tip, and I do want to touch on an idea that you mentioned, which is you knew the companies you wanted to work for.
Yeah.
And I think, again, the most successful job seekers I see not only know their goals and are paying attention to their professional relationships and supporting and growing their network, they're also clear about where they want to work, and they find ways to begin to build relationships with those employers before a position ends up on a job board.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's even a general mentorship tip too, is build the relationships before you have anything to ask. I want to quickly touch on the people who want to change careers. And there's two groups that I want to get into. The first one is just people who are in a career right now and they know that they aren't where they want to be and they know where they want to go. But how do they go about pivoting careers?
If they're clear about where they want to go, they need to start building relationships with people in that field and reaching out to them and asking them for advice about how to do it. And I think one of the best sources, Brian, is to find people who've made the switch. So if you're working in the corporate world and you want to move to a nonprofit organization, identify people in your network or people who can introduce you to others who have done exactly that. Sit down with them and ask them what barriers they faced, what objections hiring managers had when they were interviewed for positions, and most importantly, get advice about how they overcame those barriers. And that'll give you insights into what you need to do to make that switch. Mm-hmm. Recognize it's going to take more than just scanning a job board and looking for positions in the field where you want to go. You're going to have to understand the needs of the employers, their concerns about you're making that sector switch, and you're going to need to get advice about how to overcome those objections.
Yeah, the other thing that I would throw out there is that we often have this tendency to, if we're changing industries or careers completely, we tend to ignore or overlook the experience and the skills that we've generated in our previous positions, whereas it could be really helpful to identify how those things could affect or positively impact your chances at a new job. And then the other group that I wanted to address, which is really the big one, and I think a lot of people listening to this right now might find themselves in this situation, is if they're in a job and they know that they want to change, they know that this isn't the thing they want to be doing, but they don't know what the next step is or what they want to be doing. What advice do you have for people in that camp?
It's not unlike what we talked about earlier. Be clear about your goals. If you're and look for advice from people again who've made the switch. I think the key thing is to get started. So many people know they want to make a change of some kind, but it seems just like insurmountable job. And I know this sounds very basic, but breaking a task into small steps that you can take and committing to doing something perhaps once a week, sitting down with someone for an informational interview, having an appointment with someone in a career coach or someone at a career services office, going to an industry event in the sector where you want to work. If you do that every week consistently, you're going to get the task is going to seem a lot less insurmountable, and you're going to make progress and get the job you want.
Yeah, so if you don't know what that next thing is for you, just set some goals of what you'd like to achieve, not tied to a specific job per se, because that's going to change. And then, you can always change course as you go. Mac, I can't believe we've been on this call for close to 30 minutes. Is there anything else worth mentioning that we haven't touched on? And if you can't think of anything, I'd love to find out from you, which you reminded me right now, is what are the sorts of things we can be asking in those informational interviews?
think in informational interviews, you want to walk into those meetings. It is a business meeting with a plan and agenda. And a good informational interview has three parts, Brian. The first is to share your story and your goals. The second is to ask specific questions about your search. This could be questions about employers who might be hiring in the field you want to work in, questions about concerns employers might have about your candidacy. Whatever it is, there's a reason why you ask to see that person. And this is not about picking somebody's brain or having coffee. This is a business meeting, and you want to have in advance 3 to 5 questions that you want to explore with that person. The third thing you do in a successful informational interview is you ask for recommendations about other people you can reach out to, and because you want to grow your network. So if you do those 3 things, tell your story, ask specific questions about your job search, and ask for recommendations about who else you could connect with, that's a very successful meeting. It's not about asking someone for a job. It's not about picking someone's brain. It's a structured conversation with a definite outcome. You get bonus points, Brian, if you do a 4th thing, and that's at the end of the meeting. And you can do all this in 20 to 30 minutes. At the end of the meeting, if you ask, how can I help you? Mm-hmm. And people are always surprised when they're asked that question. But you want to ask it for 2 reasons. Again, networking is about being of service to others. It's not just about asking for help. And second, it affirms that you have a lot to offer. No matter what your age, whether you're in your 20s or your 50s, you've got skills, experiences, and relationships that are valuable. And you're going to have so much more success professionally if you offer to share those resources with others with no expectation of getting anything in return.
Yeah, so many parallels with a mentorship relationship. I was going to, when you said you had a 4th thing, I was going to say pay for the coffee. Mac, I do want to be mindful of the time, but before we wrap up here, I've got some quick fire questions at the end. So just the first thing that comes to mind in a sentence or 2 is perfect. The first one is, what do you wish you'd been told in your 20s?
How to look for work. I wish somebody had told me that I needed to master it as a skill.
Mm-hmm. So basically what we've discussed right here today. What is the biggest opportunity for...
I'm still talking about it.
Oh, go ahead. I didn't get that.
I'm sorry. 35 years later, I'm still talking about it. Yeah.
What is the biggest opportunity for quarter lifers today?
I think there are so many professional opportunities that are available because of changes in technology. Particularly, you don't have to limit yourself to one market. If you're in one city and you want to be somewhere across the country in the United States or anywhere in the world, through clear focus about your goals and good networking, you can go anywhere you want. You just have to know where you want to go.
I love that. I think that might be the quotable for this episode. Mac, I know that you have a lot of business, a lot of stuff going on online. Where can people go to find out more about you and Mac's List and your other businesses and everything else you got going on?
They can visit maxlist.org to find out more about our job board and podcast, books, and courses. We do have a show on iTunes called Find Your Dream Job. Every week we talk to a different career expert about the nuts and bolts of job hunting. We have a book called Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. And if your listeners go to maxlist.org/comeback, they can download the first chapter of the book for free.
Oh, that's very generous. And I'll link up all of that in the show notes. Mac, before I get to the final question, I just want to take a second to acknowledge you today for coming on and sharing all your expertise with us so openly. Like you just alluded to now, it's 35 years later and you're still speaking about this stuff. And I think it's so valuable to be sharing, how to find that dream job and some tips that people can use. I'm sure they're going to find this episode really, really valuable, as I have. The final question that I do have is, what one thing can listeners do this week to start creating their own quarter life comeback?
Set a goal for their next professional or personal opportunity, whatever it is that they're wrestling with. Write it down and go out and talk to other people about it and get advice about how to make that goal happen.
Mac Prichard, thank you so much for coming on the Quarter Life Comeback.
Thank you, Brian.
So there you have it, guys and girls. That wraps up episode 99 of the Quarter Life Comeback podcast. And a big thanks to our special guest, Mac Prichard, for coming on the show. As I mentioned, I do love having some of these older guests on to add sort of a mentorship component to the interviews, and I'm sure you can agree it was a good one. If you like this one, please share it around with your friends on social media and shoot me a tweet at Bryan Teare to let me know your biggest takeaway. For me, it was the fact that in order to really master job hunting as a skill, we need to get clear on what it is that we want. Otherwise, recruiters will pick up on that and we'll shoot ourselves in the foot. The important thing to know here, and the small distinction which I caught in the interview, was you don't need to know what you want to do for the rest of your life, but just what you want to do next. And remember that next job could just be a place to develop a skill that you're looking to master in order to really do the thing that you want to do long term. Now, as always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in this episode at bryanteare.com/099. And make sure you go and subscribe at quarterlifecomeback.com to get all these episodes and much more as soon as they go live. I've got a lot of exciting things planned, and I appreciate you more than you know. And until next week, guys, keep creating your quarter life comeback.